All right, let's dive right into this. We've got a collection of stories that, honestly, sit right on that razor's edge between the supernatural and just cold, calculated deception. We're going to look at some first-hand accounts of some really strange paranormal encounters. And this is the crazy part, we'll see how those exact same beliefs can be twisted and used to pull off some truly devastating scams.
So this quote, "I felt something was in the room, and then it was gone." This comes from a guy who had this just deeply unsettling experience. And get this, it was his very first time traveling alone. It all goes down late one night in a hotel room in Dubai. Probably the last place on earth you'd expect something unexplainable to happen.
So, our first story takes place in a hotel. And you know how it is, sometimes you feel like you're not the only guest in the room. Our guy here, he's a little nervous. It's his first solo work trip. So to feel a bit safer, he actually decides to share a room with a colleague. But as he was about to find out, sometimes a roommate offers absolutely no protection from whatever was visiting that night.
Okay, so let's set the scene. It's late. He's in his hotel bed, phone in hand, watching old cricket matches. Just trying to tune out his colleague's snoring. The room is quiet, it's still, everything feels totally normal. And then, a sound. A really unnerving sound that just cuts right through the silence.
What he hears is the faint rustling of shopping bags. See, he'd done a bit of shopping earlier and just tossed the bags on a chair, kind of out of his direct line of sight. So at first, he writes it off. It's just the AC. But then, the rustling gets louder. It sounds more deliberate. Almost like someone is standing there, physically squeezing the plastic. And then, bam, the bags just fall, a loud thud in the quiet room. But here's where it gets really weird. This wasn't just a jump scare. The second that thud happened, his body had this intense, terrifying physical reaction. It wasn't just him being scared. It was like his body was responding to a physical attack.
He says he was just frozen, completely paralyzed. His heart is absolutely hammering in his chest, and there's this loud whistling sound just screaming in his ears. In total panic, he just starts reciting prayers in his head. And as he's doing this, he feels something, a distinct presence, physically leaving the room. And the craziest part? The second it was gone, everything stopped. Instantly. The pounding heart, the whistling, just gone, like a switch was flipped.
But wait, the story doesn't even end there. Because the next morning, he talks to his colleague, who admits, he'd heard strange noises coming from the cupboard the day before. Then the hotel manager kind of hints that, the hotel, and maybe Dubai in general, has a bit of a reputation for this stuff. And then there's this other story about a similar thing happening in Cambodia, where a friend's intense fever just broke right after some bags fell on their own. You start putting these pieces together, and it's a pretty compelling pattern, right?
All right, so we've just heard about a fleeting, spooky encounter in a hotel. Now we're going to shift gears to something way more personal, and honestly, way more terrifying. This is about a mysterious illness that hit a family member, an illness that doctors just could not explain.
So his young cousin starts going through this absolutely baffling ordeal. First, she would just collapse. No morning, just out cold, anywhere, anytime. Then this strange red liquid would come out of her mouth. Everyone thought it was blood. And the aftermath was just chilling. She'd wake up with absolutely no memory of what happened, but she just stared at people with this haunted look in her eyes. The doctors were totally stumped. They even suggested she was faking it until they ran a lab test and discovered that the red liquid, it wasn't blood at all.
So, with the doctors having no answers, the family was desperate. They ended up turning to a spiritual healer. And the explanation they got was terrifying. They were told this wasn't a medical condition. This was an attack. This was black magic, supposedly sent by a jealous business partner.
And things escalated big time. In the presence of this healer, the girl who had just been unconscious suddenly started speaking, but it wasn't her voice. It was this harsh, heavy, deep voice that was just not her. It was completely alien. After weeks and weeks of spiritual treatment, she was cured. And for the family, that was it. That was all the proof they needed that something supernatural had been at play.
Okay, so this brings up a really important question. When you're dealing with all these unseen forces, how do you tell them apart? In cultures where these beliefs are common, it's not all just lumped into one big category of ghosts. There are distinctions.
And here's the key distinction you need to know. On one side, you have Astrat,
Think of this as a kind of supernatural presence. It's like the feeling in the hotel room. It's tied to a place, it's unsolicited, but it's not necessarily out to get you. But then, on the other side, you have jadoo, which is black magic. This is totally different. It's an intentional, targeted attack designed to cause harm. And understanding that difference, well, that's absolutely crucial, because it's right in that gap between the two that predators love to operate.
Which brings us to the dark side of all this. Let's break down the anatomy of a scam and see how belief and fear can be weaponized for profit. We're about to look at a case where these beliefs were used to pull off a sophisticated and just heartbreakingly devastating scam.
So how do they do it? It's a classic 4-step predator playbook. Step 1. Gain trust. The scammer approaches a mother and reveals these shockingly accurate details about her life, stuff there's no way she should know. Step 2. Create fear. She drops a bombshell, a terrifying prediction. Your son will die when he turns 21. Step 3. Offer a solution. But I can help, for a price. She demands money for prayers and gives one very specific, very strange instruction. You are forbidden from opening this one cupboard in your home. And step 4. The heist. The mother obeys, paying for a whole year, never once touching that cupboard.
So for an entire year, this poor mother does exactly as she's told. She pays the money, and she never, ever opens that cupboard. A year goes by, she finally opens it, and it's all gone. Her family's entire life savings, about 1 kilogram of gold, had just vanished.
So the big question is, what happened? Was this some kind of supernatural theft? Did the scammer really use black magic to make the gold disappear? Well, the person telling this story has some serious doubts about that. He suggests there are a couple of other explanations that are far more likely, and in a way, even more disturbing.
So, forget the supernatural heist for a second. Here are the more likely explanations. 1. Hypnosis. The scammer could have hypnotized the victim, getting her to remove the gold herself and then making her forget she ever did it. 2. And this one's maybe even simpler. It was an inside job. Someone in the house was an accomplice. And the logic here is pretty solid. As the speaker says, if spirits could steal, they would be robbing banks, not cupboards. Human greed, not otherworldly forces, was almost certainly the real culprit here.
And really, when you look at all these stories together, they point to this incredibly powerful and often dangerous tension. It's the tension between deeply held spiritual beliefs and the very real, very human danger of fraud.
And this is really the takeaway here, why this stuff matters. When people are in distress, when they're scared, when they're desperate for a shortcut to fix their problems, they become incredibly vulnerable. And that vulnerability is exactly what these charlatans are looking for. They are experts at taking genuine fear and genuine faith and turning it into their own personal profit.
So in the end, it all boils down to one single question. Whether you're dealing with a strange noise in a hotel room, a mysterious illness, or a con artist with a far-fetched story, when you're faced with something you just can't explain, the most important decision you have to make is who or what are you going to trust.